Hello everyone, and welcome to this quick video tutorial on how to install Debian 11 with a desktop environment and guest additions on VirtualBox. So if you're here just to learn how to install Debian on VirtualBox and use guest additions, you're going to learn that here, but the motivation behind this video has a lot more to do with development projects I have coming up and video ideas that I have that are really going to require me to have a desktop environment. So what we're doing with this is we're really building a server. It's just going to have a desktop environment kind of laid over it. And it just comes in really handy with some development work. So the first thing we want to do is make sure you have VirtualBox. I'm just going to quickly show you where to go for that. You can just do a Google search. Oracle VM VirtualBox. URL is virtualbox.org, and you would just come here and click the download button. And what you need to do is make sure you get the right package. So the current machine that I'm working on, the physical machine that I'm working on, is a Windows machine, so I would click on Windows hosts. So this is the host, not the virtual machine. We'll be working with Linux in a little bit, but if you're using Windows as your host machine, this is the link you would click. If you're using Mac, this is the one you would click, and if you're using Linux, this is the one you would click. I'm in a Windows environment, so I would just click on that, and you can see the download here. It doesn't take very long at all, and once it's downloaded, you can open it up. Make sure you have admin privileges. And then really it's just a matter of clicking next. There's nothing special you need to do here. There may be things that pop up on the screen that you don't understand. The best thing to do is just go with the defaults. You should be good. I'm not going to bother to install this because I already have it on my machine. I just want to give you the quick instructions on what to do. Particularly, the important thing is make sure you download the right thing for the right host environment that you're using. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is download Debian. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this setup here. Yes, I do want to cancel. All right, so we can do that. Let's just do a search for Debian. And you should see Debian, the Universal Operating System. You can click on that link. And here you can get the operating system. Go ahead and click download. Okay, so you have a lot of different options here, and it looks like they're just going to go ahead and automatically download it, which is good. But really what you're after, you want to make sure that this link here is the one that you download. So you want it to be a .iso file, which is kind of a CD image that you can insert into VirtualBox to install Debian. Okay, so as you can see, this has gone to my downloads folder. I can now minimize my browser, and I apologize for the messy desktop, but you should have an Oracle VM VirtualBox icon after you install VirtualBox on your machine. If you did all the defaults, it will automatically create a shortcut for you on the desktop. So you want to find this and you want to open it up. And so I'm just going to bring this into the window here. If you've installed VirtualBox for the first time on your computer, you'll find that this space is completely empty. These are all virtual machines that I've built. If you've seen some of my other videos, you've probably recognized some of these things here. Now what we want to do is add a new virtual machine. And we can do that by clicking this little new icon here. Okay, and so you can decide where you want to put your virtual machine. My default here is kind of the users and then username and then VirtualBox VMs. That's pretty standard for a Windows host machine. In this case, I think what I'll call this, so I want to do a video series on DSpace, and I'm probably going to use this machine, so I'm just going to call it DSpace, but you can call this whatever you want. Let's see, DSpace. Okay, now I want to make sure that I select the right type of virtual machine that we're building here, and in this case it's Debian Linux, so I'm going to click on Linux here. And then version, they're going to default to Oracle. But we're going to be using Debian 64-bit, and because it's 2022, I don't believe Debian makes 32-bit anymore. So you're going to need to go with 64-bit, and hopefully your computer isn't 32-bit. At this point, if it's a newer machine, it shouldn't be. Um, so as long as you're running something fairly new, you should be good by just simply selecting Debian 64-bit. Okay, now we can click Next. And so with this, I've noticed with DSpace installations, it uses a lot of RAM. And if you don't allocate enough, you could have things freeze up on you. Normally with a virtual machine, I will allocate 4 gigabytes of RAM. However, in this instance, I think I want a little extra power, so um, I'm gonna do 6 or about 6. So I'm just going to put that there. It's very likely that you could get away with just using 4 or possibly 2 gigabytes, but definitely not less than 2. I think this 1 gigabyte here is a little outdated. I think if you just use 1 gigabyte of RAM, you're probably going to run into problems with any environment. So at the very least 2, 4 is best, but in my case, I'm going to need 6, so I'm going to put it to 6. Then I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Okay, you have a couple of options here. You're going to want to go with Create Virtual Hard Disk Now, and this is just going to create kind of a VirtualBox file that configures everything in your virtual machine environment. I would not try any of the other options here unless you absolutely know what you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create. Same deal here. I would just go with the default. Just simply put, this is very specific to VirtualBox. So this is kind of a VirtualBox file. I think if you selected one of these, you could also, make it so that it would run in VMware or something. But we just want to keep it to VirtualBox disk image. So I highly recommend you do not choose any of these other two options. Then we'll click Next. I'm going to go with dynamically allocated. So what this is going to do is I will allocate a certain amount of disk space to this virtual machine. However, that disk space won't be used until I need it, which comes in pretty handy for the kind of work that I do. Dynamically allocated runs a little bit slower, but I've never really noticed a huge problem doing that. So I'm just going to keep it at dynamically allocated and click Next. Okay, and here I'm going to I always try to just default to 50. You could probably get away with less depending on what you're doing. 50 is going to give me more than enough space for the things that I want to do, so I'm going to just go with 50 here. You're definitely going to want to have it more than 20 or 25 because I think that amount of space is going to be taken up by your operating system. Okay, let's go ahead and click Create. All right, so now we have this new DSpace virtual machine. And again, you can call it whatever you want, but I'm just kind of doing this to prepare for a video series on how to build DSpace. Okay, so at this point what we want to do is you just want to make sure you highlight your new machine, and you can tell it's highlighted because it's in blue now. And you want to go to Settings, and there are a couple of things that we want to do here. One of the things that I always like to do is make sure in general I go to Advanced, and here we have a shared clipboard and drag and drop. So this is between your host machine and the guest machine. So if you copy something off of your host machine, you can paste it onto your guest machine, and vice versa if you select bidirectional, which is what I'm doing. And this really comes in handy. I highly recommend that you do that. I don't use drag and drop so much, but it's still good to have. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to click OK. Okay, let's go back to Settings. And the next thing that I want to look at quickly is Network. Let's go ahead and click that. So for those of you that have no use to use SSH, so kind of remoting into a server, you can simply keep it to NAT, and that's fine. Everything is going to work well for you if you keep it at NAT. If you do want to SSH, you're going to have to select Bridged Adapter. In some instances, this may not work for you depending on how your network is configured. In which case, I would say if you're at work, you're going to have to talk to your IT department about getting more traffic out of whatever port you're plugged into. So if you want to play it safe, keep it at NAT. If you want to be able to SSH or use this machine to SSH into other machines, I would go with Bridged Adapter. I use SSH all the time, so this is kind of a default for me. I'm just going to keep that there. And the last thing that we need to do here in settings is click on storage. And what we need to do is we're kind of essentially inserting the installation disk into VirtualBox at this point. So that's the Debian ISO file that we downloaded. And we want to insert a disk here. So you can do that with this little icon here. So if I click on that, I want to choose a disk file. Okay, and we downloaded the Debian ISO file. So I'm going to go to Downloads, and then you'll see that I have the Debian ISO file that I downloaded here. That was done today, and I had one last week that I was playing around with too. So I can just go ahead and click this new one, and I'm going to click Open. Okay, so we see that our ISO file is in the disk drive, in the VirtualBox disk drive. We can go ahead and click OK. And now we should be good to go. So we can begin the installation. We have dspace, or we have our virtual machine highlighted here, our new virtual machine. We can go ahead and click the Start button up here. Another way of doing it is if you right-click on it, you could then select Start, Normal Start. Okay, so here we have the option of how we want to go about the install. And you can do it with the graphical install, or you could do it with the command line sort of interface install. Both of them are exceptionally easy. The graphical is just a little bit easier because you can point and click. So maybe we'll just go with that. We're building a GUI in this instance, so normally I do the normal install just because I'm so used to it. But graphical install, let's go ahead and do that. Let's double click on that. Oops. Oh, when you get this message, just go ahead and click cancel, and I'm just going to cancel this out up here, and then I think I can go ahead and click that. But no, I can't. So I'm going to have to hit enter because it was highlighted, and now I think I can actually point and click. So okay, so here you need to select the language for your system. So whatever default language you want to use is what you'd select here. It defaults to English, which is what I'll need. So I'm going to click continue. I'm in the United States, but you want to be sure to select whatever territory you're in. I'm going to click continue. Okay, I'll be using American English for the key map. So my keyboard is an American English keyboard. You want to make sure you choose whatever keyboard you're using. We'll click continue. Okay, so after a minute or so, as Debian is configuring the network, you'll be brought here. So it's asking for a host name, and in this case, it's going to be the name of the virtual machine that you're building. As I've said before, dspace is the system that I want to build in here, so I'm going to just go ahead and call this dspace rather than Debian. I'll double click in here and dspace. And then you can go ahead and click continue. And so they're asking for a domain name here. And in my case, I'm not going to mess around with this. I'm doing everything on localhost, all of my development on localhost. I don't really need to worry much about the domain name, so I'm going to leave that empty and do continue. It's very likely that you don't need to worry about the domain name either. So go ahead and click continue. Okay, and here they're asking us to set up a password for the root user, who is the system administrator for the machine. I don't do this in development environments, and actually, honestly, the production environments I use are set up for me, so I never have to go through this process with that. But I don't like to provide a root password because then I have to configure my user as a sudo user, and it's not difficult. It's just an extra step, and I don't want to deal with that. It doesn't make sense for me to do that. What I'm going to do is just hit continue, and I suggest you do the same to follow along with any video I make, because I always use my regular username, which is usually Jeremiah, to configure everything. I don't sign in as root. And so that's going to cause some confusion if you're following along and you've set up a root password, simply because things are going to work just slightly differently. I recommend you do not enter a root password in this instance. So go ahead and click continue. And so now they need a root user or somebody that has full admin privileges. So that's what we're doing here. I'm just going to use my name, and then I'll click continue. And so this is kind of the root user. It sets me up as a sudo user. It gives me admin privileges. This way always just works best for me in development environments. I'm going to click continue, and then I'm going to click continue again. And now I can choose a password for this user. And I'm just going to keep it simple. They don't have to be super strong as a virtual production environment, or a virtual test environment. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. Okay, I am on the west coast of the United States, so my time is going to be Pacific. We'll hit continue. Okay, and we'll quickly get this screen here. It's probably not worth describing what each of these things are, but just know that the guided use entire disk is probably the best way to go. You can set it up so that you, particularly if you did it manually, you can partition your disks, and you can put your var drive on or your root directory on one partition. You can put your home partition or your home directory on another partition. Comes in handy, particularly in production environments for troubleshooting and fixing things. But in our case, we don't have to worry about that. So we're just going to use the entire disk, and we're going to let the installer partition things for us. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. This is the safest way to build a virtual machine. So we'll hit continue. You can just go ahead and hit continue here. So this is the disk that it's targeting. It's not targeting anything on your host system, so you don't have to worry about that. We're not going to do any damage to your Windows operating system or your Mac or your or another Linux operating system. So we'll hit continue. So we're going to do the all files on one partition. And again, you can do the separate them options that they give you here, but we don't want to mess with that right now. So we'll just go ahead and hit continue. And so here, our root partition, we get 52 gigabytes of storage space, and they're going to give us some swap space, 1 gigabyte, which is nice. So what we want to do is make sure finish partitioning and write changes to disk is there. And again, this is not going to do anything to your host operating system. Okay, so now they're just making sure, is this what you really want to do? And yes, it is. Then the installation process will begin again. I'm just going to pause while this does its thing. And in a minute or so, we get this window here. And this is just asking us if we have any other installation media to install. So in the old days when, operating systems would come on a couple of disks, this is the part where you would put in the second disk. We're using an ISO file, and we don't have to worry about that. So there's nothing else to add here. So we're just simply going to say no and continue. And let's see, so now we need to configure the package manager, and the default package manager for Debian is apt, and so that's the repository where we go and grab software and all that stuff. I live in the United States, so I'm going to select United States. You're going to want to click whatever country or location is closest to you to ensure that data transfer happens faster. So I'm going to click continue. When in doubt, just go with the default of deb.debian.org. That's the official mirror of Debian. But there are other mirrors as well. So I know, for instance, that I live on the West Coast. I live in Oregon, and this here is the Oregon State University Open Source Lab. So they're closest to me. I'm going to go ahead and choose that, and it should kind of increase my data transfer time when I use my apt command to install other packages. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue. I don't have any proxy information to add here. It's very likely that you won't either. And so now we're getting the apt repository configured. They're going through the Oregon State University open source library in my case. So I'm going to let that do its thing. We'll just pause until that finishes. Okay, one thing that I want to point out is that sometimes when I'm installing Debian on VirtualBox and I select my mirror, so in my case it was the Oregon State University mirror, um, sometimes I get a message saying that it's a bad archive mirror error, and when that happens, you could just skip it, but it's kind of a pain. I've always found that if I just start the process all over again, so I go back and I restart the machine, it always fixes the problem. I'm not sure what's happening there. I wish I had a good solution for that other than just start over. But if you do encounter that, just know that if you start over, you should be fine. So with that said, the page that should pop up, or the window that should pop up, is this configuring popularity contest, and this is just a way to grab statistics on what's being used, what sort of packages you're downloading, and all that sort of thing. I'm going to download a lot of things that I don't necessarily. I feel like I'm going to skew their numbers because it's kind of a development environment. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and say no and continue. And it doesn't matter if you say yes or no. It's not going to affect the performance of your machine. So now we get to select some software, and this is where we choose our desktop and a couple of other things. So the first thing I want to point out is if you want a desktop environment, which is the graphical user interface, you want to make sure this is checked, the Debian desktop environment. So their default is to use GNOME, and that is a very powerful desktop. It is quite possibly the most powerful I've encountered with Linux, but it's also a little bit of a resource hog. And because I want this to be more of a server than a desktop environment, GNOME's not really a good choice for me. What I would like is something that is lightweight, and KDE Plasma is actually a really good option for that. I have to admit, I've used most of these. Maybe the LXQT and the LXDE I haven't, but Mate and Cinnamon, I've used those. They're pretty cool. I like them. There's nothing wrong with them, but I'm just clicking this because I know it's lightweight and it's going to do what I want it to do. Now the other thing is if you want a web server, you would go ahead and click this. You probably don't, and normally I kind of do all of that stuff from scratch. So I like to have as base a system as possible. I do like to have an SSH server. I do like to be able to SSH into my machines. For you, that may not be a big deal, so you may not need to bother with that. And then finally, the standard system utilities. I believe these are all third-party software that get installed. It's going to make your life much easier if you click this. Particularly if you intend to watch videos or play audio files or anything like that, it's really important that you have the standard system utilities. I think there are some people in the Linux community that feel as though that being third-party, proprietary type software kind of goes against the open source ethos, and that's fine. Um, I actually kind of agree with them, but at the same time, I like my life to be simple. So I'm going to keep standard system utilities, and I'm going to go ahead and click continue. And so this will install everything that we're going to need. And usually with a desktop environment, it takes a little while, so I'm going to go ahead and pause and let the installer do its thing. Okay, after about 5 minutes or so, we will get the install grub bootloader window. So this is the program that boots your computer into Linux, into this Linux installation. Yes, you're going to want to install the grub bootloader on your primary drive. I believe you have to put it on the same drive as root, but seeing as how we did everything on one disk, and with no partitions, we don't need to worry about that, which is, another good reason why we want to do the easy method. So we'll just go ahead and make sure yes is selected. We're going to hit continue, and then so here we see that it's actually the dev SDA device SDA drive is where we're going to install the grub bootloader. Not super important that you understand all of that, but you do want to make sure that you select this dev/SDA because you don't want to enter that manually. We'll go ahead and click continue. And in a little bit, we'll get the installation complete screen. So what they're telling us is we need to remove the installation media, but you can't really do that, I don't think. Well, I guess if we go here to settings and if we go to storage, and it looks like they have ejected the disk for us, so we're in good shape there. We don't have to worry about it. And we can just go ahead and click continue, and this should just boot right into the system. So far, so good. And you should see this, the grub bootloader. This is what the grub bootloader looks like. And if you don't hit enter, after a few moments, it'll boot in for you. While this is booting up, I'm just going to pause because the screen is just going to be a bunch of text. Okay, so in a short amount of time, we should see this screen, and we can put in the password that we entered earlier for that new user. Okay, so now we have completely booted into the system. However, this screen is very small, and we don't want that. And in order to get this so that we can view it in full screen, we're going to need to install Guest Additions. And it's a relatively easy thing to do. Although it's funny, every time I do it, I kind of run into little problems. So I guess the good thing about that is you're going to see how I deal with those. I do remember it taking a while to figure out how to go about doing this, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close out this screen, and then I'm going to get the pop-up window asking how to close it, and we just want to completely power off the machine. You don't want either of these other two states. They're going to cause problems otherwise. So make sure it's power off the machine and click OK. And once we're here, what we need to do is make sure the virtual machine is highlighted. We're going to want to go to settings, and we're going to want to go to storage. And you'll see this empty disk drive here. Just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and remove it completely. And then what I'm going to do is just add the optical drive. Now, here they're going to list some things that we've used in the past. You'll see that my Debian ISO files are here. There's the version of Box Additions, which is actually on my host machine. That's all kind of taken care of with the installation, and you don't really need to worry about that. What you need to do is click on this Leave Empty button. So at this point, you want to make sure that your screen looks like this. You have no disk image in this empty disk drive. This is an empty disk drive. That's exactly what you want it to say, is empty. Okay, so at this point, we can click on Cancel, and then we can start dspace up again. And I'm just going to pause as it's doing that. Okay, so I'm going to log in. Okay, so my desktop has popped up, and at this point what we want to do is insert Guest Additions into that empty drive. And to do that, there is an option up here for devices, and that's awfully small. I don't think I can make that bigger. I apologize. But it's the thing that says devices. So you click on that, and at the very bottom of the drop down, there's this Insert Guest Additions CD image. Go ahead and click that. So in this case, they have mounted the disk drive onto the system. And I believe, let's see, so we could just go ahead and open it with File Manager. And this is really the script that we want to run here, the VBox Linux Additions run. And I've never really gotten this to work quite right. If I double click on it, I get some errors. Oh, actually, it just opens it up, which is not what we want. So this isn't an executable file. Actually, I think if we go to Properties, and if we do Permissions and Advanced Permissions, oh, so I'm not logged in as root, and I'd have to use sudo and all that. All right, we're going to do it the easy way, which is the command line. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this out. I'm going to find a terminal. So let's see, I guess it would be applications, probably utilities, and I'm not seeing it. I'm just going to search terminal. This one looks good. I'm going to go with the console terminal here. I'm going to pause the video as I change the font size so that we can see things better. Okay, that should be a little bit better. So we still have our small screen, but Guest Additions is going to fix that for us. So what we need to do is we need to run the command change directory, so that's CD, and then you want / and then media, and let's just hit enter. And so now we're in the media directory, and I'm going to use the ls, the list command, to see what's in here because I forget where to go next. Okay, so what we need to do now is cd change directories to cd-rom without the 0. So we're going to run into this directory here. We're going to run the ls command, the list command, and you'll see that the VBox Linux Additions run is here. We need to run this. And actually, the reason why we couldn't do it before in the GUI was because this was not set up as an executable file, and you could change permissions to do that, but I don't know how to do that in the GUI. I know how to do it in the command line, but not the GUI. So, but we're not even going to have to bother with that right now because we can just run it as a script like this by doing sudo, which is super user do. What is it? So we're running a shell command, so sh, and then period and / and then VBox. And this is all case sensitive, so you want to make sure you keep that in mind as you're typing this out. VBox Linux Additions .run. Okay, so I'm going to click or press enter. And then, so the first time you use sudo, usually you get this little message letting you know that with great power comes great responsibility. So here you want to put in your password, and this will take, usually this takes a minute or two. So I'm just going to pause until, oh, nope, I don't even have to. Wow, that was really quick. So what they're telling us here is that the kernel modules will not be replaced until the system is restarted. So in order for Guest Additions to begin working, we need to restart the computer, the virtual machine. Not the host. You don't have to worry about the host. So what I'm going to do is just sudo reboot now. And that's the same thing as if I went up here and hit the little X button and told it to restart. Actually, I don't think you can restart. I think it's just shut down. Okay, so our system is loading. Okay, so I believe at this point you can actually go into full screen mode. And what you need to do is there is a control button. If you're using your English layout keyboard, there's a control button on the right, kind of towards the bottom right of your keyboard. You want to press that along with the F key on your keyboard, just the letter F. And that will give you this screen here. And it's just warning us that it's about to go into full screen mode. And if you hit switch, and usually this opening screen appears small to me. It's not until I go into log in that I get the full screen. So let's hope that's how it will work. And yes, that is indeed how it works. So we should be set at this point. And now you have a Debian installation on VirtualBox with guest additions so that you can do full screen. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I do hope to get some more videos up soon. One that I'm really excited about doing very soon is DSpace institutional repositories, building a DSpace repository using Debian 11. And when I do that video series, I'm gonna use this desktop environment for that. So as usual, please like the video, subscribe if you're interested in open source topics relating to libraries, or if you're just generally interested in setting up these sorts of systems that libraries use. And I hope to see you in another video. Thanks.